This is the most exciting part. Yes, ready. We're going to finish up here strong with actual digital marketing sort of tactics. So this is the nuts and bolts of two of the major digital marketing channels that we talked about. We're going to talk about email. We're going to talk about social media to be used to drive traffic to your website. So Drew's entire section about websites is so important because your website is your #1 most important communications channel. And if you remember when he started his section, talking about how, especially during the pandemic, everything went online, obviously, but even before the pandemic and once the pandemic is over, your website is still your main repository of information about you, about everything that you do. If you're sending out if you're an arts organization and sending out a direct mail postcard, let's say for an event, I'd be willing to bet that you have your website URL on there. If you are an individual artist and you have, little leave behinds or cards made, I'm pretty sure that you have your website URL on there as a place for people to go to view your work, to find out more, to find out about upcoming events. So all of those things that Drew mentioned about your website and making sure that it's optimized and accessible are super important. And I say this because before we start this next part, because you can run the best, most amazing digital marketing campaign in the history of the entire world. But if once people get to your website, it's not easy to use, it's not updated, it's not easy to find what they're looking for, it will have been for naught, right? And you will have lost them. It's going to take a lot more to get that person back after having a less than optimal experience on your website the first time, right? What's that phrase? You only have one chance to make a first impression. Absolutely it. Okay, so let's say your website is super amazing. It's top, it's perfectly optimized and everything. So now we have to think about how we're going to drive traffic there. Search engines are great. Organic search is great, but for the most of us, it's about driving traffic to our website. Wouldn't we love, I would love it if somebody would just be, and I guess there are probably some of these people who are just searching, where can I buy art? That would be really great. But most people need to be communicated with over time and driven to your website, driven to where you are so that they can achieve the outcome that you're looking for them to achieve. So with digital marketing channels, always be where your audience already is, right? In terms of whether it's email, social media, whatever it might be, use the platforms that your target audiences are already using, right? It's going to be really difficult and nearly impossible to get someone to change which platform just so that they can interact with you. Maybe for some of your really super highly engaged people, your super fans, sure. But for the most part, you want to put your content where your audiences already are. And this is really important for current audiences and also for those new audiences. And you have to, and we'll look at some specific data in a second. And you also have to put yourself, you have to remove yourself from what assumptions you might have and from what you might already be doing to say, you know what, is the most effective channel for a particular group of people a channel that I'm not already using? Or it might be one that you're using, but maybe not putting enough time and energy into for it to really be effective. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then in terms of all of the next stuff that I'm going to say, do only what you can do well. Don't feel, especially with social media, I find this happens a lot with social media, don't feel like you need to be on every single platform. right? It's better to be on 1 or 2 social media sites and be really attentive, really engaged, put out really great content on those 1 or 2 sites than trying to spread yourself too thin and be on 5 different ones, but the majority of them aren't really updated. Okay. Now you can go and you can Google, and there are people that say, you need to be posting, 3 times a day on every single platform and all this stuff. You don't need to do that. Just be on the platforms that you can handle and make sure that the content that you're posting is really quality, it's compelling, and it's relevant, right? It's quality over quantity in this case. And that goes for arts organizations as well. Same thing. Okay, quick poll. Let me pull this up here. We are going to, this one is going to be a multiple, choose all that apply. So I want to know which communications channels you're already using. Now I have some of the big ones here. Clearly this is not an exhaustive list. Isn't this? My computer is confused on what screen I'm on. There we go. Now I can see the results. Okay, so we've got some email. Looks like everybody who's voted so far is using social media in some way. Okay, we'll give it another few seconds here. Yes, Laurel, I will talk about that in a minute. Yep. Laurel asked in the chat about how frequently to post on Instagram or Facebook. We'll talk all about that in just a second. Okay, so, all right, so almost all of you have voted there. And for some reason, my screen does not want to click on that. There we go. Okay, so 100% of those of you who voted in the poll use social media, not surprising. Most of you use email. There's a couple people using direct mail, some using display advertising, some people sharing that they use some other channels. That's great. I put in direct mail here as an option just to sort of have a representation of a more traditional marketing channel. I think I mentioned before, traditional channels like print, like direct mail, like personal contact, those are still absolutely valid and worth using in the right way, right? Remember in the very beginning, we talked about that communications ecosystem with all of your different channels. All of those different channels work together, right? We can't look at one channel in its own bubble. All of them work together to reiterate and reinforce your content. And especially in thinking about different audiences and new audiences that you want to try to reach, or audiences that you want to reach better, thinking about which channels might be best, sometimes something like a flyer or a postcard might be really effective for a particular audience. Of course, you might follow that up with also sharing an email, sharing information on email or social media as well, because everything is going to reinforce everything else. It takes, 10, there used to be the 7-touch rule, right, in marketing, where it takes 7 touches, or somebody has to see your content 7 times before they take an action. With our current communications channels that we have available to us, somebody could see our content, and this happens 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times before they end up achieving that outcome, right? And they're probably seeing it on multiple channels. You might send an email to someone, they click through to your website from that email. which means then they get retargeted on Facebook with some paid Facebook content. Then they click on that Facebook content to see some additional information. Then maybe they might attend something and receive a thank you postcard in the mail or whatever it might be. So they're interacting with you on a number of different channels. And that's really important to keep in mind when we talk about communications, is that this concept of, to use another jargony phrase, this concept of ROI, or return on investment, is really, really difficult to pin down at this point in time, right? Back when the only thing that we did, we had a show happening, we put an ad in the paper, and then people came to the show. That was really easy to show the ROI for that ad in the paper, right? Or when it was just, I'm putting print ads and I'm sending out postcards, right? It's a lot simpler to determine what that is. Now we've got so many other things happening that it's difficult to just pin down return or to attribute a certain outcome to one particular channel. Everything is working in concert. No pun intended. Okay, let's talk first about email communications. So this is the, I'm going to keep going with this. This is going to be the refrain that you're going to hear a lot, right? So you saw similar messaging a long time ago when we first got together here this afternoon or this morning, that the important things when you're putting out any sort of communication is that combination of targeting, messaging, and the desired outcome. This is absolutely the case with any sort of email that you're sending out. And I put email first before social media because of any digital marketing channel. Email, if we are thinking about ROI, email has the highest ROI. And this has been this way for a decade, right? It makes sense though, right? If somebody is engaged with you enough, has a high enough level of engagement where they have given you their email address, then they are already a certain level of knowledge, a certain level of interest. And if you are using MailChimp or Constant Contact or something like that, you're paying a relatively nominal amount of money per month for that service. If you can generate, 10 conversions, whatever that conversion is, whether it's an event attendance or a purchase, whatever it is, off of one email, that has a really high rate of efficacy, right? Email isn't always like super sexy. We think of social media as being sexy, right? Because email's been around for a long time. We've all been doing it for a long time, but you have the most possibilities with email, and it's probably going to have a higher rate of return for you. Also, I feel that email is really one of the most intimate types of communication when we're talking about this ecosystem that we're in today, because just like I say, somebody trusts you enough to give you their email address, which is not a publicly listed address like a mailing address that anybody could look up in the phone book or whatever. Are there even still phone books? I don't know, but you know what I mean. They have chosen to give you a private piece of information of them so that they can receive your messaging and your content. And there's a certain level of trust there. So we should really be mindful of our email list and make sure that we are treating the people on our list that we know them, because we've got a lot of data, which we'll talk about in a second. And also, honor that trust by delivering the most relevant and compelling content for the people on that list. Okay. So for each email, before you send out an email, you should identify these 3 things, right? Who is this email for? Who is it going to? What is the messaging that's going to be relevant and compelling to that particular group? And what do I want people to do after they've received this email? Now, inherently, this is going to mean segmenting those email communications. Remember, we wrote out our three sort of audiences, right? So those three audiences, we'll call them, the marketing word is segments. So when we send slightly different messaging, like you identified earlier, to those segments, it's going to result in good things. When you send one email out to your entire list, which I'm sure no one is doing, it's okay if you are, don't worry, again, safe space, it's cool, we're cool. If you're sending out your emails or the majority of your emails to your entire list or almost your entire list, there's more frowny faces and smiley faces in the little graphic on the left, right? Only a portion of that group is going to find that email to be relevant, right? If we, instead of sending that one email to the whole list, if we break that up into those audiences, right, and send specific messaging, relevant messaging to those audiences, you've got a much better chance of having a higher rate of success with that email. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. You're saying, wait a minute. You're telling me that instead of taking the time, I already take time to make one email, then instead of making one email, you want me to make 3 emails? Yes, that is what I'm saying. But again, let's harken back to the slide a couple slides ago. Only do what you can, right? So if that means starting out by segmenting your emails into 2 separate ones, that's good. That's at least going in the right direction. Because when you separate or segment these email communications, it's basically going to increase everything good and decrease everything bad, right? So it's going to increase your engagements, right? Because the relevance, creating those relevant communications, we want people to engage with those communications, to respond to those communications. So creating this segmentation is going to encourage engagement, right? Which in email land is, opens, click-throughs, and of course, conversions, while decreasing the bad stuff, right? Now, I do have to say, I have here unsubscribes, as being bad, but they're not inherently bad. If someone unsubscribes from your email list, it's not necessarily a bad thing. If someone signed up for your list and then they just determine, you know what, this isn't relevant to me anymore, I just don't want to be in the list, that's okay. Let them go. Because it's better, just like I was talking about a minute ago about quality over quantity, this absolutely is the case with an email list. We all want to have bigger email lists, but bigger isn't better when we're talking about email lists. You could have an email list of 40,000 people, but if only 5% of those people ever open any of the emails, it doesn't matter that there's 40,000 people on that email list, right? Because only 5% of them are opening. So if somebody unsubscribes, that's fine. Now, of course, you'll be able to see if somebody, of import unsubscribes, and you can reach out to them and kind of maybe talk to them and say, hey, why did you, unsubscribe? But at a basic level, unsubscribes aren't inherently bad. Now, one more word on that. If you send out an email and all of a sudden you see a lot of unsubscribes, that is the number one way that you can determine that what you're sending to that list is really not relevant to a lot of people. And they're saying, I'm going to unsubscribe altogether. And remember, there's that level of trust. If somebody has given you their email, they are trusting you to send them things that are going to be interesting to them. So I want to harken back to the F pattern here. We're going to get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of email best practices as far as how they should look. This is always a big topic. I get questions all the time. So I did a little section on, how should emails look? So this F pattern that Drew talked about for websites, it's essentially the same for email. What loads when you load the email in whatever program the recipient is using, that's what's going to get the most eyes, right? Also, it's important to note that what we view at the top of an email, and it's the same for a web page, at the top of an email is going to determine whether or not we continue reading that email. So this is really basic stuff here. So let's say, and we'll talk about subject lines in a minute. Let's say your subject line is really great. It's really relevant. It gets in someone's inbox. That person opens it. What loads first when they open that email should be interesting, compelling, visually pleasing, so that they want, and let them know that what's in the email is going to be interesting to them, so that they will want to continue reading that email rather than, deleting it right off the bat. So I'm going to give you some overall best practices for email sort of design elements. Now, all of this is taking into consideration, or making the assumption that all of you are using an email service provider like Constant Contact, Emma, Mad Mimi, MailChimp, ExactTarget, one of those, where you're able to send out HTML emails to your list. If you do not use one of these services and you are sending emails out through your Outlook or your Gmail, if you've got any sort of group of people that you're sending these emails to, please switch over to one of these email software. There are actually laws about sending out mass emails and certain elements that you have to have and functionality that you have to have in them so that you can be in compliance, like legally. MailChimp and Constant Contact and all these other ones, they automatically will have those things in place so that you won't be in danger of being not in compliance of those things. Okay. We don't have enough time, in this particular session to talk about which software you should use. There isn't, just like with, the e-commerce providers like Drew was mentioning, it's really hard to say, oh, you should use this one and not that one. However, if you are looking to adopt an email software or, really lean into using this as a communications channel, I like MailChimp for, independent artists, for small arts organizations. I think it's a really good solution. I do not receive any sort of compensation from MailChimp for recommending them. I just think it's a really easy to use system, but certainly just like any other software thing, there's other factors to making the right choice for you. All right, all that said, okay, here are the best practices for emails. So when you're sending out an email, you're going to want to have these 5 things. So the first thing is you have to make sure that your subject line is compelling, because before anyone sees the email itself, they're going to read the subject line and determine whether or not it's worth opening. And this is something that I feel we kind of forget a lot, because we get really involved in designing the email and making the email like super pretty and amazing looking, but then we kind of leave the subject line till the last thing. Well, if we just put in all that time into making the email look pretty, if our subject line isn't optimized, then no one's going to see the email in the end. So making sure that you have a subject line that is concise and is indicative of what is actually in the email. This is the best practice here. So rather than saying, March update or March newsletter, try a subject line that has some more descriptive text about what actually is contained in that March newsletter. What is your most compelling item that you have in that particular newsletter? Second thing, and I see that we have questions coming in. I'll make sure to get to them, absolutely, because I think I mentioned before, email is like my favorite thing. Oh my gosh. Okay, second thing, images. So in general, having one really great image near the top of the email that's going to really draw people's attention in right when that loads is going to be really key in getting people to stick with you and scroll down and continue reading that email. Now, I will say, there are times, and there is data for certain types of email that show that plain text email or emails with a majority of text work really well. And in some cases, you may want to do that. However, in general, including an image near the top that is, just really great, draws people in, is going to be really helpful to get them to stick with you. The third thing is concise body text. Just like Drew mentioned, short paragraphs, right? This isn't, for any specific reason other than the fact that we all scan, right? We scan first. That's what the F pattern is really showing us, right? It's showing that we kind of go across and we scan a little bit more and scan a little bit more, and then we go down to the bottom, right? So making sure your messaging in the email is concise and just enough to get people's attention so that they will want to click on your call to action button, which is number 4, to find out more about whatever that thing is. Now, email, just in a lot of ways like social media, but even more so, email really is a vehicle to get people over to your website, right? You want to get people on your real estate. Another reason why your website is so important, right? You can't put every single thing about you or what you do in an email. That would be like way too long, right? But you can provide just enough so that people will click on the call to action button in that email and find out more. For most emails, actually, I should say for all emails, I'm just going to make a bold statement. For all emails, clicking that call to action button would be your desired outcome, right? From that email. You want people to click. That is the vehicle to get them to do that end result, whatever you want them to do, whether it's attend or buy or whatever it is. And then the 5th thing is what sort of we just talked about segmentation. Sending that relevant messaging to those various groups so that it makes sense and is interesting to them. You could, like we talked about before, you could send a really great email, but if it's not relevant to the majority of your list, then you're not going to have a successful email, right? So it's got to be segmented in a way where it is relevant to those different groups and provides them with the information that they are looking for. Okay, wait, before we go, do I need to look at this question? Yes, question. Yes. Okay. When you send out an email that includes an image, will MailChimp, etc., also direct me to know what size an image should be so that the image doesn't load too slow? Okay, so with these software, in a general sense, with a software like MailChimp, when you upload an image into MailChimp, it's automatically going to size it, and it's like MailChimp and Constant Contact, they also have little editing, like cropping tools when you load it in so that you can make sure it's it's the right dimensions and stuff like that. But yes, there are fail safes in there so that you're not uploading a print size image into an email that's going to take forever to load. That said, it's a good question about images in email because the download speed for any sort of image or media in an email is going to be dependent on the connection, the internet connection of the recipient. So, you can't control whether they're, whether they have a slow cellular connection on the mobile phone that they're viewing your email. Those things you don't have control over. So the best approach is to use one of these softwares that's going to sort of optimize what you put in there. And then also make sure that your emails are not overly image heavy, right? That's why I recommend maybe one image near the top, or we'll look at a sort of newsletter style email in a minute that has sort of smaller images throughout. The one thing that you don't want to do ever in an email, ever, and I'm real confident in telling you not to ever do this, is to send out an email that's just all one image where you have like text in the image. So, you can go into Photoshop or Canva and you can, make a pretty little rectangle or something, and you can type out all the text and then export it as a PNG or a JPEG. Never ever send that out as an email. Number one, it's a really great way to get your email put in spam, because when it comes into the inbox of the recipient, they don't see any text. Number two, from an accessibility standpoint, because Drew talked about a lot about accessibility, if someone is using a screen reader to read email or some other device, it can't read text that's embedded in an image, right? It's the same thing for websites too. If you have text embedded in an image, Google can't read text that's embedded in an image, right? So if you've got a landing page on your website where you have an invitation or a graphic for an upcoming event, and it's all pretty and designy and all the text is in the image, Google can't read that, and neither can a screen reader. Am I going too long on this tangent, Drew? Clearly I have very strong feelings about it.
You just keep going, because those are exactly the right things to say.
So yes, if you are concerned about image load, yes, use MailChimp or Constant Contact or one of these services, and it will help you do that without you having to do anything, right? You just upload the image.
Second question too.
Yeah, from Lisa. I'm getting ready to send out my first art email. Should I send to everyone rather than segment? Some people have signed up over 2 years ago. I've just been procrastinating. Oh no, you're good, but you're doing it. You're sending out your first email. Excellent. So, okay. So this actually is a really great segue into another thing that I like to talk about with email regarding sort of list age. So usually I recommend cleaning your email list, yearly anyway, whether you're an organization or an individual, because email addresses are much more sort of disposable than, a mailing address, right? So, people can switch emails all the time, and do, especially if the email you have for someone maybe is like a work email and they've switched jobs, right? So if you have some people who have been on that list for a while that you've not sent anything to, the first thing that I would do, and I'm assuming that you are using something like MailChimp or something like that, the first thing that I would suggest doing is cleaning that using a service that I like to use called Never Bounce. And you can go to neverbounce.com. Thank you, Drew. He had it the minute I said, he knew I was going to say it. Can you guys tell that we present together a lot? So what Never Bounce, and this is really great for organizations as well, for those of you from organizations. What Never Bounce will do, you upload your list. There is a small fee for it, but you don't have to pay anything for you to just upload the list, and it'll tell you if it needs to be cleaned or not. So, and that part is free. So the initial part is free. And then if it tells you it needs to be cleaned, then, it's like a couple cents per email address, right? It's very nominal in cost, but really worth it, because, and this is sort of the end result, I'm really glad you asked this question, is because if you send to that email list and all of a sudden get a ton of bounces, that's going to flag your MailChimp account, and that's bad news bears. So clean it first. It's when you do use a service called like Never Bounce, and again, I receive no compensation from Never Bounce. I've just used them for a long time. It'll tell you like the invalid email addresses, and it'll show you which ones are not good, so that you can actually look at them. Because inevitably, every time I've used it, someone has come up like, oh, wait, that's a board member. Their email is now invalid. And then you call them and they go, oh yeah, I have a new email address. I switched 2 years ago. And we're like, what? So clean it first, but I would still segment it. If you know who is on that list, if you know where they came from, right? If you know you have a group of people that have maybe purchased from you before or attended something before, I would still segment that. You don't have to do 10 different segments, but I would still kind of tailor that message to those groups, even if it is still a, hi, I'm emailing you, I'm still here, you haven't heard from me in a while kind of email, right? Because let's say if it is that kind of email, that's the perfect way to say, let's say you have one group that attended an opening in the past and that's how you have their email. You can say, hey, remember me, you attended my opening on whatever, for whatever. I want to connect with you, or whatever that might be. So you can still factor in some more relevance to that messaging, I think. Okay, cool.
Thank you so much. That was really helpful.
Good, I'm glad. Okay, let's talk about typography in email. And, Drew talked about typography and websites where, in email, because we're not necessarily talking about sort of the WCAG stuff. In email typography, it's really more about making things easily readable, right? When, just like we just mentioned, short paragraphs, headlines, section headings, all of these things are going to make your email a lot more easy to read and to scan. Let's face it, I would love to say that there's a way that I can magically prevent people from scanning. It's not happening. That's what we do, right? Especially with email. We spend such little time with email that when you use typography to your advantage, you're really going to help people move through the email and stick with you until they get to that call to action, which is what you want. All right, I have a couple of examples. None of them are art examples because I try to pick examples that aren't directly related to the group I'm speaking to, because I don't want to play favorites or make anybody think I'm showing favorites. So here's one from PNB. For all my ballet fans out there. So you'll notice in this email, right, it's got compelling images up at the top. It's got just a short little paragraph of text. And then it's got, your important information, what is this email about? And then what action they want people to take, which in this case is either more information or to buy tickets, right? So very concise. And this is what you want all your emails to be. It can be very tempting to try to put in all the information about something in an email. In this case, clicking on the more info button is going to take people to that full information about this particular event. It doesn't need to go all within this email. Okay. Now here's the more newsletter example that I have to show. So you can send sort of two emails. The previous one was what you might call an e-blast, which I don't love that vernacular. I like just calling it an email, because when I hear the word blast, I think about blasting it to our entire list, which is absolutely not what we're going to do anymore with email. So that's just an email. This is more of a newsletter style email, or I like to call it a digest email, because in a digest email, you're going to have information about, multiple things. But you can still see that in this particular email, and again, I had to make it skinny to fit stuff in it. So the orange part is actually the background of the email. The text is black text on a white background, so great for accessibility, right? Very easy to read. At the top, we've got headlines happening. We've got short text. We've got images, compelling images near the top. With the subsequent items in the email, we have a small little image, a small piece of text, and then a call to action button. So these are really your things that you should make sure to include in your emails. Make it really clear what you want people to do, a concise amount of text that allows people to sort of scan to find the information that is going to be interesting to them. Now, I will say one thing about newsletters, and this is especially the case with arts organizations, but also for individual artists as well. The only people that should get a digest style email or a newsletter style email are the people who have the highest level of engagement with you, right? And this, if you're already sending out a newsletter, this might be the opposite of what you're doing, and that's okay, because we are taught that our newsletter should go to everyone, right? But really, the people that are going to be the most interested in seeing all of the stuff that we're doing or all of the upcoming stuff for the next month are the people who are the most highly engaged with us, right? The other groups of people are probably going to be interested in specific things based on what they have attended or how they have engaged with you in the past. And I have some just examples here. With email, you've got you can send email and segment your email based on internal data. So, past attendance, fellow artists, friends, etc. So these would be some of these would be you can extrapolate your levels of engagement from there. You also have a self-selection element to email as well, because you can track what people are opening emails, what they're clicking on, and that you can make a reasonable assumption by what people are clicking on, what people are interested in, right? So let's say you have your segment of people who are very highly engaged with you. They're art lovers, they've attended things in the past, they've purchased from you in the past. But with email, you can add a layer onto that. So if you can identify your group of people that open all of your emails, no matter what their other attributes, I would still group them in the highly engaged segment in email, because if they're opening all of your emails, they're telling you, they are self-selecting that they want to hear from you. They want to hear what you have to say. And that group is golden, right? Because you know that they're going to open your email communications. Okay. So what I would recommend, what I would offer for the next time you send out an email is, instead of sending one email to everybody, segment it at least into 2 groups. We sort of just kind of mentioned it a little bit with Lisa when she asked her question. Try segmenting it into 2 separate groups to get started. It shouldn't take all that much longer, especially if you're talking about sort of the same thing. It just might mean a little bit of a different messaging, right? A different way of talking about that particular element. And I have some content suggestions because I know there's probably some folks here today that maybe don't send a lot of emails, or, as Lisa just mentioned, she hasn't sent one in a long time, right? So here are some suggestions on what you could send. Obviously upcoming things, but now because of, so I'm going to say it like a third time, because of the current times, there might not be in-person things happening. Sending emails with interesting behind the scenes content, or even things like a reading list or a podcast list, could be a really interesting way to engage with the people on your email list. So try thinking, I hate this phrase, but I'm going to use it. Try thinking outside the box with the content on, what would be compelling to the person that is receiving the email. I've had a lot with arts organizations since the pandemic started, and I think, I hope it continues after. Things like podcast lists, ebook lists, these kinds of things, like selected blog posts for reading. The recipient of the email doesn't necessarily only want to consume content that's directly created by you, right? If it's something that is interesting and something that's related to what you do, that's viewed as something that's very positive by the recipient, and that still is going to be an engagement in your communication. You're also positioning yourself as an expert and a resource. Okay, so next activity. Everyone has their camera turned off, so I don't know if everyone's still awake, but I'm gonna assume that everyone is and still with me. So what I would like you to do on your ye old timey piece of paper that you used for the last one, if you've still got that around, if you can quickly map out, just jot down the next 3 emails that you're going to send out. Jot down the date that you want to plan on sending them, the audiences for each, right? Noting that the audience, you may have 3 emails to 3 completely different audiences, right? And then, similar to what you did in the beginning, which content items are going to be in those emails that are going to be relevant to those particular audiences. We'll do like a couple minutes. Oh, question about building email databases. Okay, so a few just really basic ways to build your email list, right? The number one way is to ask every time you can for someone's email address. And when you ask for their email address, be really clear about what you're going to be sending them, right? Very few people will just blindly give an email, right? If, you know, you may think that they do, but they're really not. So if somebody has attended an opening of yours and they give you the email, you know, it's to receive more information about openings because they really love the work. They really love that they're there, right? So when you're asking people for the email address, make sure you share what they're going to be receiving. Make sure that you, on your website, that you provide an opportunity for people to give their email address at any time. You know, so usually that means putting a little field or a call to action, maybe if you have a sidebar or a footer or a header or wherever it might be. Certainly when people are signing up to do something, you know, you're going to absolutely, hopefully you're asking for their email if it's happening online, especially, you know, make sure that the email is required. But again, there's no fast way that you can snap your fingers and all of a sudden have an email database, right? To build your list, it takes time because that list, you want people on that list that are, to use like a sales term, that are like a high quality lead, right? You don't want just anyone on the list because remember, it's quality over quantity. It's better to have a smaller email list that is really highly engaged than a larger email list where, you know, only a small percentage of people open. But yeah, but in a very basic sense, ask for their emails as much as you can. And people do have emails. A very, 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 very small number of people really do not have an email, right? 10 years ago, sure, there were some segments that maybe really didn't have an email, but now it's really rare when somebody really actually doesn't have one of some sort. Okay, so let's go into social media so that we can start to wrap this up and then open it up for additional Q&A, just general Q&A. So social media, the sexiest digital marketing channel, right? From the poll, you all are using social media, so that's great. But remember, social media is just one part of that ecosystem. Every channel in that ecosystem, remember, it reiterates and reinforces the others. So you can't look at social media in a bubble. You can't look at it in a vacuum. You can't rely on a social media channel to you know, accomplish all of your wishes, hopes, and dreams, right? So putting content out on social media is the same as anything else. When you post on social media, you should know who that post is for. Is the messaging relevant for that particular group of people? And what do you want people to do when they see that social media post? Most of the time on social media, really, it's about engagement, and I'll talk about that in a second. But we want people to engage with our social content, just like any other communications channel. Are you starting to like the theme here? It's all variations on the theme. I am on the music puns today. I have this little graphic here about social media, and don't forget, you'll receive access to this deck so that you can look at this later. But I wanted to show you some numbers about social media platforms and which sites are more used than others. I know if a lot of artists, when I work with artists are Instagram users at a slightly higher rate than sort of the general population, right? Because it lends itself so perfectly, right? It's a highly visual platform. But in thinking about where are the people that we're trying to reach, where are they already? Some of those groups are likely to not be on Instagram, right? Facebook, with all of its woes, Facebook is still has the highest number of active users. And for many of you, a lot of your target audiences are probably going to be active Facebook users who are not fellow artists, right? So there's a really easy segmentation right there, right? If you know that you've got your artist community that you're engaging with on your Instagram, that's one type of content and messaging right there, right? If you're trying to reach another group to engage with you, to purchase your work or to attend social events, these kinds of things, that might be putting some time and attention into Facebook, because that might be where they are more often. So keep this in mind. Again, the best platform or the best channel for a specific target audience may be one that you're not currently using or that you're not using to its full potential. All right. Every social media, and to that end, every social media platform has a different feel, voice, and post structure. So I don't want to make too many assumptions if anybody is using a tool like Hootsuite or Buffer or something like that to post to multiple social media platforms at once. If you're not doing that, good. If you are doing that, you're going to have to make sure that the posts to those various platforms adhere to the structure so that they feel native in those feeds. With social media, we know from real data, year over year data, that most people access social media platforms on mobile devices using the app. So that's the vast majority, right? The vast majority of Facebook users, for example, it's like 87+%, almost exclusively access Facebook through the mobile app. Well, Instagram, it's all mobile because that's how Instagram is. But that's also important to note as well. If you are like Drew's little tool that he shared with you about how to view your website on other types of devices, making sure that you are aware of what devices people are using to access social, that impacts how your posts are going to be. So let me give you some best practices for some different posts in terms of structure here. So these first two are Facebook. They're screenshots. They're screenshots from desktop, to be quite honest, just because they came out cleaner and nicer. So with Facebook, in general, you want to have no more than 4 lines of text. Include a natively uploaded photo or video. So that means where you're actually clicking on the little photo video icon and uploading a photo or video from your device for that post. And then also having a clear call to action, like a clickable URL in the post. Now, not every single post might have a URL that's applicable, sure, but most cases, you're probably going to have some sort of call to action. There's going to be some sort of outcome you want to achieve. So make it easy for people to achieve that outcome, right? So you can see here. Also, another thing to notice is that you want to make sure to tag everything and everyone that's applicable in your Facebook post. So you can see here on the left, Playhouse Square is tagged, and on the right, All Saints Brewing Company is tagged. So if there are people, places, things that you can tag within the body of the post, do that. Okay. Now I have, oh wait, I have to go back. Did you see my joke in the Great Lakes Theater one? Do you see it? This is A Christmas Carol. Do you see it? Scrooge sees dead people. I was real proud of that joke when I wrote that. It's like the best dad joke ever. Amazing. I mean, this post didn't do nearly as well as I thought it would with that joke as the leading. Anyway, there is a question. I just saw something pop up. Do you recommend making tiny URLs directing to a specific page on your website, that page or a tiny URL. Sure, if you have a tiny URL or a bit.ly, right? If the URL that you're sending people to is really long and kind of cumbersome, sure, bit.ly it. Yeah, that's probably going to be easy. It's just going to be prettier in the post. But if the URL is something really simple, like, you know, mywebsite.com/tickets, then nah, because it's perfectly fine just then. And in that case, the people viewing that URL are going to know exactly where it's going to take them. So there's a little bit of a trust factor there as well that can work to your advantage. Yeah, but if it's a really like long URL, sure, bit.ly it. I have some other ones here. So Facebook, if we're thinking of like formality levels on social media, well, LinkedIn is like the most formal. Facebook is probably the next most formal, right? Instagram and Twitter are much less formal, right? Much more vernacular. Well, it's all vernacular, but you know, sort of a much more conversational approach. So these are Twitter. On the left, this is an example of a series, and I put this in here because I think it's an interesting, I think it's a useful example of a fun little thing that really ended up being super compelling for the audience. So if you on Twitter, if you are on the Twitters, and you search in Twitter, if you search for hashtag Mollusk Monday, it's a thing. You'll find some of these posts from a lot of different museums, but this is my favorite. I'm a Pittsburgher. This is from Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh. These posts blew up for them, and all they were was this gentleman here, Tim Pierce, telling a snail joke, like a dad joke about snails. So it was a very simple kind of fun series that they created that wasn't fuddy-duddy, that wasn't like a learning experience, that wasn't super serious, but that was really, really compelling to, well, for a time, everybody on the Twitter. That was really, really successful for them and got people to engage. So think about content like that on social media. Also on the right, this is another Twitter, Spark Notes. If you are a literature nerd, you should absolutely follow Spark Notes. It's hilarious. They do these kinds of really cheeky posts. You know, this is Hamlet, what they're describing here, but they're doing it in a very sort of vernacular-y, meme-y kind of language. Because their target audience is going to respond to that type of content on Twitter. Thank you, Drew, for manning this chat. So what thoughts on engagements versus likes? Well, a like is an example of an engagement. So on let's take Facebook, for example. So on Facebook, there are multiple types of post engagement. So there's likes, clicks, comments, shares. Yeah. So all of those things would be classified as an or reactions, right? So likes expanded into post reactions. So anytime you can encourage an engagement, whatever those things might be, that's definitely what you want to do on social. On Twitter, you know, a like or a click, that's going to be an engagement. Yeah. So here's some more quick examples. These are Instagram. On the left here, this is the Wick Poetry Center, which is at Kent State University, which is just south of where I am right now. But they do these poetry readings. They make poetry participatory. It's a really great program. But they will show these very sort of casual shots, not posed, about the people participating in their programs. And I think it's a good reminder that not every photo that's posted on social media needs to be something that's very sort of posed and sort of super professionally done image, because this obviously is a very compelling image depicting this particular program, and it's absolutely showing such emotion in this person's experience participating in this program. So this is super compelling, right? And that's what you want to go for to encourage those engagements. Then on the right here, oh, is this Marissa? Yeah. This is an Instagram story. And I rarely talk about Instagram stories because of my only do what you can do well thing. However, Instagram stories definitely do have a place. If you're an Instagram power user, I wanted to make sure to talk about this because I've met so many artists who are. So the New York Public Library, this is the New York Public Library's account. What they have done is they have created a series of Insta novels where they have, and they've done it in a very designy kind of way because, you know, they're the New York Public Library. They're very fancy. Where they are actually, they have, and if you go to their Instagram, you can see the story, so you can still read them here. But they have taken works of literature and converted them over so that people can read them in their Instagram stories. I love this because Instagram stories, the user of an Instagram story definitely skews much, much younger. And so this campaign, this set of Insta novels generated such traffic that it was clear that they said, look, how do we get younger folks who are using Instagram to interact and engage with these classic works of literature in a meaningful way? And so they went to where that target audience already is, which is Insta stories. And they created this experience that would be compelling and relevant to that target audience. Hey, it's compelling and relevant, like, to me. And I've read The Raven many, many times because I'm a bit of a like literature geek. But, you know, it was still a really fun experience to read it. And there was, you know, graphics and things like that. So I like to use that as an example of some really, oh God, I'm going to do it again, out of the box thinking. In terms of identifying the target audience, identifying the outcome, and then delivering that content in a meaningful way to that audience. Oh my gosh, we're running out of time, you guys. We were doing so well on time and we've just squandered all of that. Okay, let's do one more and I'm going to talk about paid Instagram, because I always get questions about paid social, but I didn't want to assume that everyone is doing it. So I thought we could do this little poll, and then if we have some of you who are doing it, then we can do a couple slides on that. Have you used paid Facebook or Instagram? Oh yeah. Okay. Okay, it's looking like most of you are. Okay, so it's a little bit more even now, but there's enough of you who are or who have used it before. So I do want to say a couple quick notes about paid Facebook, Instagram. So in a nutshell, don't hit the boost post button at the bottom of a post. And I'm really compelled to share this with you because I don't want Facebook to take advantage of you because it's sneaky. So paid Facebook, paid Instagram is very, very powerful way to reach your current audiences and new audiences because of the targeting that is available to you, because you can deliver content quickly, easily. You can advertise with a small budget, right? And have a meaningful campaign. This little boost post button here is Facebook's sneaky way of getting money out of you, you know, $10 at a time, but not providing you with all of the advertising targeting features available. So when you are, oh, Drew just put a thing in the chat, thank you. When you are doing paid advertising on Facebook or Instagram, always go in and create that campaign through your ads manager. And we probably have an Arts Hacker post about that as well, through your ads manager, so that you can have all of the targeting options, all of the placement options that is possibly available to you. And that so you can also see your data cumulatively, which is important, right? So you can see all these metrics cumulatively, which is what you want per campaign. And when you're looking at metrics, this is going to be the last, I know I'm right up against time. When you're looking at social media metrics, like we mentioned earlier, the most important metrics are metrics about engagement, right? So we also look at, it's kind of like the sort of email list phenomena, right? Like looking at the high number of people on the list and going by that metric, right? On social media, you probably have seen things like impressions or reach, you know, the number of impressions of something, number of people it's reached, but really that's all well and good if you have the engagement. It doesn't matter that, you know, 10,000 people saw your Facebook post if only one person engaged with it, right? That's telling you something. So with social media, always make sure that you're looking at your engagement metrics as in order to gauge efficacy for that particular content or that particular campaign. Okay, resources, hang on, hang with me. So 2 resources, we talked about Bitly. Google also has something called the campaign URL builder, which can add some tracking functionality that'll come through in your Google Analytics. So this is also really great tool if you're looking to, if you're an analytics person and you want to better track the traffic coming into your website. Also, image resources. I'd be willing to bet most of you are familiar with Canva, probably. And because you're artists, you might also use Photoshop or other things like that. Canva is a really great free tool that can very easily create social media optimized graphics because it already has all the sizes, the proper sizes preloaded in. So you can really simply make those kinds of things without having to bother with Photoshop. There's also another tool, both of these are free. There's also another tool called Landscape. And what Landscape will allow you to do is, let's say the only thing you need to do is properly size and crop a photo to post on Instagram or Facebook. Landscape will allow you to do that. You just upload it, you choose where you want to post it, it crops it, and then you download it. It's really, really simple. If you're just looking to crop images, I don't use Photoshop anymore at all for that. I just use Landscape because it's so fast when you're dealing with that kind of thing. Okay. We are a couple of minutes over. Thank you for staying with us, everyone. I am here for questions. If anyone wants to stay, if you have to leave, thank you so much for being here with us. And like Marissa said in the chat and in the beginning, you'll be receiving all of this stuff. But if you'd like to stay for some and ask some questions, please feel free to do that. We made it, everyone. We made it.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mike McGregor. I'm the arts program coordinator for Laguna Beach. The workshop has officially concluded, but as Ceci said, if you want to stay, you can go ahead and stick around for a little bit and answer some questions. So thanks for attending, especially those who stayed with us the entire event. We hope you learned something useful and will take something from this and apply it to your own business or organization or personal artist sales. Big thanks to Ceci and Drew, our presenters. Thanks to Adam Schwerner and the rest of the Arts Commission for having this event, as well as Art Affair, the Festival of the Arts, the Sawdust Art Festival, and Americans for the Arts for partnering with us. And finally, thank you to the lodging establishments in City of Laguna Beach for funding the workshop and making it free for all of you to attend. As mentioned, we have a questionnaire, maybe that was mentioned, but we have a questionnaire that will be emailed to everybody. And it'll also be hosted on the Americans for the Arts event page, where you'll be able to also access the recording of this event in the future. I think it's 2 days from now. If you have any questions about today's workshop, you can feel free to email me, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Michael. We have a couple of questions in the chat, and please feel free we'll unmute if anybody wants to ask their question verbally. So Laurel has asked two of the most common questions I get regarding social media. And Laurel, I love that name. I had an Aunt Laurel. That's such a great name. There's no way to beat the algorithm, in short. There's no way to do it. And if someone tells you they can beat it for you, they're lying. Lying. So, but yes, you are correct that the algorithm will push content to more people. It will kind of rank it higher as more people engage with it, right? So that is correct. That's kind of how that algorithm works. So if a piece of content is getting lots of clicks and lots of shares and lots of likes, Facebook goes, oh, this must be something that's really good. We're gonna show this to more people. That said, there's no way to kind of beat the algorithm. And if I can use the V word, I can't believe I've made it this entire time without using the V word. Going viral on social media today is very different than going viral on social media 5 years ago, because the algorithm is different. The number of the amount of content is different. So the best thing to think about when you're posting on social, on Facebook and Instagram, is make sure that you're posting really interesting, engaging content. And also, especially on Instagram, make sure you're hashtagging it appropriately, and make sure you're tagging all of the applicable people, places, and things within the body of the post. Also, make sure that doesn't mean spam tag. So don't tag people, places, or things that you want to see the post or that you want to sort of latch on to. People still do that, and it's frowned upon. So just make sure that you have all of those things in line to give you sort of the best chance for that content to be viewed by the most eyes. That said, if you've got something very specific, because Facebook and Instagram is owned by Facebook, it's a pay-to-play model. Mark Zuckerberg wants more money. So, if you want to really reach new people, then most times that means paying a little bit of money to promote that content. Let's see. Oh, you have another question. Hang on. So when you post on social media, you're asking a question and you're hoping people will respond. Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as any other content, right? So, is that question or content super compelling and relevant to the people who are going to immediately see it on Facebook? It really depends on what it is. I mean, if you want, we can talk later about like a very specific, your specific case study here, but usually just a question on its own might not be enough to get enough of the ball rolling in terms of engagements. You certainly would want to have an image with it anyway, or you could do a poll, depending on what platform you are. Hashtags. Make sure that you're putting in on Instagram. On Facebook, hashtags don't really matter. I mean, you can use them, but that's not how Facebook is built in terms of the search functionality. On Instagram and Twitter, hashtags absolutely necessary. Just make sure you're hashtagging it with whatever is applicable for that particular post. Again, don't spam hashtag. So don't hashtag something with a particular hashtag trying to get it into the content of something else that's not really related. Frowned upon. But yeah, absolutely. Hashtag it with everything that's applicable. There are a few apps. If we're talking Instagram, there are a few apps out there that will help you generate hashtag groups so that you can identify, additional hashtags. There's one I think called Hashtag Expert. Oh gosh, there's a few others out there. You can also, I will admit, I do this for a living, but I will admit to being fuddy-duddy enough to Google hashtags, because I don't necessarily know all the ones that might be trending, all the ones that the kids are using these days, which I think is completely fine to do, to make sure that you're staying on top of those things. Of course, I say it's completely fine because I'm doing it. Hang on, I'm going to stop share so I can see everyone here. Okay. Anyone else have any questions? We still have 22 people on here, so if anyone has any questions,
Now
please
is
be
the
brave.
time.
Yeah. And now everybody starts leaving.
And oh, okay, well then fine.
Oh
I
god.
just wanted to hear what someone else wanted to ask.
No other questions. Now we're
Recommendation for reliable web host and web design program. It's a bit of an open-ended question because it depends on what kind of website you need. And based on that, there are options, I could certainly recommend. If I can give you generic ideas, like say if you want to build a WordPress site, both WP Engine and Kinsta are probably the two most solid, reliable, best customer service providers out there, but you'll also pay for that too. I can say that if you find a web host that is super cheap or inexpensive, you're likely going to pay for it another way with just a really bad service. The site will run slow. It's going to be difficult to maintain, and you just aren't going to be happy, and the service will be lousy too.
yeah. I mean, what I would say usually is managed, anything that's managed hosting, really, at a very basic level, right? Like, I don't mean to take over from your answer, but and Drew deals with a lot more of this. So if I've experienced this at a high level, I'm sure he experiences it way more, but like, it can be really compelling if someone says, $2.99 a month hosting. You're
Run.
like, exactly. That's not a good thing. Just like what Drew said, you're going to pay for that later. I mean, if I had a nickel for every time someone came to me because they were on a host like that and something really awful happened, so I would try to look for something that's like it's called managed hosting. Any tips on increasing Instagram followers? Are you one of those Instagram power users that I mentioned might be at the workshop today, Laurel? Instagram followers really, well, number one, for a sort of more offline approach, just make sure that you are sharing with people that you're on Instagram, so you can incorporate that in your other communications channels. So including it in emails that you send out, even your personal email signature, include it on your website, make sure people know you're there. But then also hashtags are a great way to do that also. Hashtags both in your Instagram profile description, but then also in the posts themselves. Right, making sure that you're using the hashtags that people are going to be searching for that would be interested in what you're posted. Yeah. Best days to post on Facebook and Instagram. There isn't such a thing anymore because of how the algorithm works. Facebook and Instagram, you might post something on Facebook and somebody might see it 5 days later. I'm sure this has probably happened to everyone who's still with us, right? Like you see an organization post about an event, and you see it 3 days after the event happens. Because of how the algorithm works, time doesn't really matter anymore, right? So, there really isn't a best day or a worst day to post. My advice with social, is concentrate on just posting really good content. So when you've got something really good, really compelling to post it. That's the same with email. Somebody asked, was it somebody that asked about frequency with email too? With any sort of frequency in terms of digital marketing or digital communications, it's really all based on the content. Kind of like the don't do more than you can do well approach. Don't feel like you have to send an email every single week if you don't have content for it. Don't feel like you have to post on Facebook 3 times a day if you don't have enough great content for it, right? Post or send an email when at a pace that you can keep up with to keep the quality level high.
And on that note, I have to run. So thanks everyone for stopping by today. But Ceci, I don't know if you're sticking around more or
I
not.
can
But
stick around more because we do have 17 people, so I can stick around.
terrific. In
Yeah.
the meantime, feel free to send questions directly to either of us afterwards, and we'll be happy to get back to you directly. Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Drew. Arts Hacker site, specific tips for, we don't have specific tips for Etsy on there. Is anybody else who's still with us here on Etsy that has resources, like specifically to share? Oh, thanks, Claudia. Okay. There's got to be some resources for Etsy out there. Michael, do you know of anyone or of any organizations that has that?
That are currently with us.
Or just any resources for Etsy, just in general for artists?
Oh, no, I'm not familiar enough with Etsy.
I shop on Etsy. I frequent Etsy. But
I wonder if like lynda.com or something like that has.
I wonder.
I'm sure they would. Lynda has like almost anything you could ask for. But
let's see. If you're familiar with Laurel, are you familiar with Lynda? It's it's lynda.com, right? Lynda.com.
Yeah.
There's it has I mean, you can find a tutorial, exactly what Michael just said. There's a tutorial on like literally everything on there. That might be, I'm sorry, I don't have an immediate answer for that question. Yeah, thanks, Marissa. Yeah. Let's see. Okay. If anybody else has another question, speak now, or you could just email me later.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for being with us today. Thank you for, listening to us talk all this time.
Thank you, Ceci.